Hey, I'm Cole Gertis, and today we're going to teach you everything that you need to know about knife making. Or maybe just enough to be dangerous.
That sounds fair.
Today I'm joined by Geoff Anderson. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm very intrigued because today we're going to talk about something I don't really know about, making knives. I'm excited about it because it's something that we use every day. You know, just having a knife in the kitchen, or like I'm a big pocket knife guy, and I almost always have one on me. And I've been told certain things, like when I've gone to buy a knife or something, they're like, oh yeah, this is going to last you forever because it's made of some certain kind of steel. And it kind of goes to the back of my mind and I have no idea what they're talking about, and then it goes away.
Mm-hmm. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
But now you'll know enough to at least be able to basically understand what they're talking about.
Yes. If not even making a knife, maybe just to purchase a knife.
Both.
Yeah. I'm very excited. And so you've been making knives for a few years now.
4.5 years. It's a pandemic hobby.
Yes.
Fall of 2020.
My favorite kinds of hobbies.
Yeah. So I don't know that anybody else I know picked up knife making, but I did.
No. In fact, I was telling a friend that I was having you on, and they were very excited just from the get-go about somebody that's making their own knives.
Yeah, it has upped my cool factor by about 10. Everybody gets excited when they hear I make knives, and they mention forged in fire immediately.
Yeah. When I picture you getting the capability and like the sign off of being a knife maker, I picture like this mountain ceremony with a very long bearded man.
I wish it was like that. It's more just I'm a guy in his garage, like yelling at his tools and failing.
A lot more solitary.
Yeah, exactly. It is a solitary pursuit, but I've gotten to the point where I feel like I can talk about it with some intelligence. So
okay. What was your starting point? Like, what tools did you get to begin with?
So, well, I mean, you can start with just hand tools, hacksaw, angle grinder.
Oh, really?
Files.
I would have thought that you would have needed some really specific things.
No, you can start with those things, but you will be very frustrated if you
really? Okay, all right.
I started with a really small belt grinder from Harbor Freight. It's a 1 inch by 30 inch belt on it.
Okay.
And it was my non-risky investment, I guess you could say. Yeah. And I got hooked pretty quickly, but it produced results, but it's vastly inferior to what you need to do it at a high level. Okay. That's the best way to put it.
So the belt grinder, obviously the main sharpening tool.
Well, you can sharpen with them, but it's mainly because a knife is a piece of steel that has a certain geometry. That's what makes a knife, as opposed to a bar of steel.
That makes okay.
So it needs to grind down to a point.
Okay.
When you think about the triangle of a knife, it starts like that. You have to make it like that.
So outside of that, I mean, how's it come? Like when you're making a knife, like do you literally just get like a chunk of steel?
Yes. You get there's different ways you can do it, but most knife makers, like bladesmiths, forge steel alloys by hand. Okay. Or with power tools and various other things. A knife maker, you usually do what's called stock removal. Okay. So you get a piece of bar stock at whatever thickness you'd like, a couple of millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, something like that.
Gotcha.
And you basically remove steel until you have the shape you want. You cut out the shape you're looking for, and then you grind and sand and work on the steel with various tools and instruments to get it to the shape you want from a geometry perspective. So it can cut things.
When you so where would you buy this? Are there websites? Like, do you
That's
just
what
go
I would recommend. Yeah.
Okay.
There's specialty knife making supply stores online. There's one in Texas. There's one in Ontario, California called True Grit. That tells you anything you could possibly need for knife making.
Huh. When you get like a standard piece, is it already shaped sort of in like a knife thing, or is it literally just a
You can buy
big square
knife blanks that are already in the shape of a knife, but I would recommend getting just a piece of steel and designing your own. That's kind of the fun and point of it. Yeah,
that's so cool. Because I would have not imagined that, because I picture it either being literally like hot metal dumped into the thing, and you're like hitting it with a hammer, or it being just like, it's already 90% of the way there and you get it. I did not picture it being like a rectangle and then you're doing the whole thing.
You start from basically nothing. It's just a piece of steel. And one thing I will correct that I enjoy correcting is when you see them pouring steel in the movies, that's casting. Okay. You can't do that and make a usable knife or sword.
Oh, really?
It would be a disaster.
Oh, so they've lied to us.
Yes, they have.
Oh, man.
It looks really cool on camera.
It does look cool.
That is the reason people do it.
Oh, man. So what would that be?
What do you mean?
Like what? Like if you're casting,
Yeah.
What's the like end result for that? Like just to get a big,
you get bubbles and various other
unmoldable
things, and whereas like, you can cast a statue perhaps, or maybe even an axe head, but you wouldn't cast a long blade. It would be almost impossible to get it right.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, this interview's over.
Sorry. No, that's it's just the hammer hitting the steel to make a blade. That's kind of the point.
Okay. Very neat. See, already learning things.
Yes, I'm happy to enlighten you.
So once you get it and you have it, like, do you have 3 or 4 or 5? I don't know. Like, do you have certain shapes that you go, okay? Because thinking of my kitchen knife collection,
right.
I know that they all have different names. And again, somebody's explained this to me before, and I've forgotten all of it.
Okay.
But like, do you have ones that you go, okay, these are kind of the like a starting point blade. This is an easy blade to make, and these are harder blades to make.
Yeah.
Do you?
So I've been asked, like, if I was going to make a knife from scratch, first time ever, what should I make? I would say start with something small.
Okay.
And something with like a really simple, predictable, understandable shape.
Oh, okay.
So like a paring knife, size knife would be good, or a utility knife, something you might carry on your belt.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Okay.
Mainly because as the blade gets bigger, the metal part, it's really hard to keep that consistent as you're shaping it from a geometric perspective. Because the hard part of knife making, I think most people will find, is putting in the bevel, so the part that makes it sharp.
Yeah.
That's the hard part to keep consistent. And it's hard to know why, because you can get slippage if you're on a belt grinder. If you're doing it by hand, you can screw that up a number of different ways.
Yeah.
It's mistake prone. But the smaller it is, the less opportunities you have to screw it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've sharpened knives on like a whetstone and stuff. Is that a similar process? So you get a blade and you have it and you're ready. Is that how you sharpen
Ultimately,
it?
that's like a microscopic version of shaping the blade in the first place. Because when you're sharpening a blade on a stone, you're basically you're sanding it. You're establishing a micro bevel, a small edge to make it properly sharp.
Okay.
I've used stones for sharpening. I use a mechanical sharpener.
What is that?
It's a miniature belt grinder that you can use basically with a guide, so you can get exactly the degree bevel you want for the edge of the knife.
Okay, so you kind of hold it at that angle.
Yeah, and you just run it through. And you can do that by eye on pretty much any abrasive instrument. And whetstones, I think, are the most classic and consistent for a lot of people.
Oh, okay. If you're not using that, would you use like a belt or something like that to get it? And then is there something else? Like, is there any kind of machinery that would do that people use? Or is that more like, or is that more like probably industrial?
Well, if you see a professional knife sharpener, the kind of guy who services a butcher shop or professional kitchens, they all use basically some form of a belt sander.
Oh, okay.
Typically, they're narrow belts that are long, so they don't heat up too quickly.
Oh, that makes sense.
The speed of feet per minute, all that kind of thing. And they universally use mechanical sharpening like that. Like the whetstone method is for people who are super traditional or are just really into whetstones or are doing it for Instagram.
Okay. That makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because it looks cool.
Yeah.
It's super effective too, don't get me wrong.
Super effective, but probably not time effective.
Massively inefficient. Yeah.
Yes.
That's why there's mechanical solutions for all these things, because they speed you up enormously.
Yeah.
That's what makes, I think that's the difference, not to jump ahead in the conversation, but the difference between basically being a starting knife maker and someone who's working at a higher level is you have the machinery to work efficiently. So you can make a lot more knife more quickly.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense, especially if you're thinking about it as like you're making 4 or 5 of the same knives.
If you're batching, precisely.
Yeah, you need to move a lot faster.
Yeah.
Than just hand swiping on a stone all day.
Exactly. I personally hate batch making because it's just like it gets tedious. So I tend to make things one at a time, even if it's the same design. I just enjoy the process more that way.
Well, you're also more of an artist with it, right? Like you're doing this because you enjoy the art of it. You're 100%. Not doing it to make 100,000 knives this year.
No, I've lost a ton of money in the equipment. I'm not doing this for money for sure. It's very much like a passion hobby kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite knife that you've made? Like, is there a style? Is there like a certain unique factor that you've been able to put in, whether it's on the handle or like some kind of ornamentation on the blade or something?
Sure. So from a knife design standpoint, I've kind of landed on a chef's knife design that I'm really happy with, and I've made a number of them now for folks. And it's based on the global brand chef's knife, which is the most common in professional kitchens.
Okay.
So I tweaked that geometry and kind of elevated it by using fancier materials and that kind of thing. So I'm really happy with that design. And then I use a mosaic pin. So getting into the materials, you pin the handle on to the blade.
Are those, when you're looking at the knife and you look at the handle, are those the like silver?
Yeah, the little circles.
Circles.
Yeah, those are knife pins most of the time. And those are basically just solid pieces of metal or brass or stainless or whatever. And I use a mosaic one, which is a bunch of tubes set into each other with epoxy. So you get a really cool design from the side.
Oh.
And I like adding that because it adds a lot of class for not a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then like exotic handle materials are really fun to work with. So you could make an argument like a clean, nice piece of walnut or some really nice looking wood is just as good.
Okay. But that's got to be part of the fun is
It
like
is.
putting your own spin on every piece or
And
you
they're
know,
all
some pieces.
slightly different, if it's materials or even details about the way I'll shape the handle a little bit and try something new each time.
Okay.
So you can like iterate and kind of play around if you're making a consistent design.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, with keeping yourself still entertained, I'm sure.
Exactly. I mean, really the only limits to it are kind of your imagination and skill level.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want, but you'll probably be hard limited by your ability, like I am regularly.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the fun of it, is like the progressive growth. It's like any other kind of craft.
This is so much more enlightening than I even imagined because I kind of assumed that you would have like an option of 10 things. And you could... Yeah, I put a little pin in the top, and that's my ornamentation on it, or something, you know. But the fact that you can basically customize the whole thing as much as you humanly want.
Yeah, as long as it's a usable tool, everything else is up to you. That's what's cool about it.
That's so fun.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you're making things for people, typically people want what they would understand and know, like a kitchen knife. There's only so far you can take that in terms of creativity before it's a little bit too much for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I tend to stay in my lane, which is like elegant, well-made kitchen knives.
Okay.
And hunting knives and stuff for the few people in California that hunt.
Yeah. Like your brother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've made up 2 hunting knives already, and I think I'll probably make more because I get bored of kitchen knives, and I decided to make a hunting knife.
Yeah. When you're doing that, so like a differentiation between even a kitchen or a hunting knife or something like that, are there different types of steel or different like base materials that you're starting with?
Typically, yeah. So a little bit about not going too deep on steel alloys, but most kitchen knives, people want stainless steel. Okay. Which is the vast majority of mass-produced knives, too. And for hunting knives, typically you're going to lean into high carbon steel, which is a little bit higher maintenance. It can rust where stainless can't. Okay. But it is much more long-lived in terms of holding its edge. Gotcha. So if you're going to field dress at elk, you want the edge to last the entire time that you're cutting this animal apart and half butchering it. And stainless, generally speaking, there aren't a lot of alloys that could probably stand up to that. Whereas with a high carbon blade, you'll just get more life out of it.
So that's why you have to obviously continue to sharpen your kitchen knives.
Precisely.
And something like that is fewer and far between unless you are like using that consistently.
Exactly. And well, and like
for its purpose.
Yeah, and the good example for people who don't hunt is a lot of professional chefs will use high carbon steel knives because it'll retain its edge for longer, its actual sharpness factor for longer, so they don't have to sharpen quite as frequently, or it won't fail in the middle of a busy dinner service or something, or get dull out quickly.
Which is why they take such good care of it, I'm sure, too, to avoid the rusting and all of the other downfalls.
Again, they're high maintenance by comparison. Most people want a knife they can just leave wet on the counter after they've cut their lime and forget about it. Yeah. And high carbon is not good for that.
Okay. Not good with acid, huh?
Yeah. But high carbon is also the best beginner steel. So if we're going to get back to you making a knife, I would say you really should use high carbon steel.
Oh, really? Because it's easier to mold?
It's easier to work with for a number of reasons, but most importantly, it's easiest to heat treat. So we're jumping into another part of the process.
Oh, okay.
So in order to make a knife, you need it to be soft enough to shape and scrape and abrade into the shape you want. Yeah. But that's going to be too soft to cut for very long. So you have to harden it.
Oh, okay.
And that involves
so what's that?
That involves
with
a lot.
Heat?
Yeah, with lots of heat.
Okay.
Yeah,
like a blowtorch? Like is that what you'd use, or
a gas forge, a heat treating oven, or even basically a charcoal grill could work in theory, or a fire pit.
So that's where we get into the movies.
Yeah, that's the part you want on camera. Exactly, because there's heat, and you typically quench it in oil, so there's going to be some fire as well.
Oh, okay. Oh man, that's so interesting. So while easier to work with, higher maintenance on the back end, and probably a lot more like tools and intensive studying to know what you're doing at the start of making it.
Yeah, something along those lines. Well, I mean, when you're making the knife, it's easiest to work with high carbon steel, and you can do it with files and all those kinds of things. Stainless is what's going to require a lot more precision.
Okay.
Especially with heat treating. You need to get it to a very specific temperature if you want it to perform well. Hold it at that high temperature for 1,500, 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of time, and then immediately plunge it in oil that isn't too cold or too hot.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, you have to temper it. So you're going to put it in an oven for a certain amount of time to knock it back a little bit. Because here's what's crazy. When steel gets really, really, really hot, and you cool it down in 5 seconds by plunging it in oil.
Yeah.
It can be so hard that it's brittle like glass. If you drop it, it'll shatter.
Oh.
So there's like a real like metallurgy process to hardening a knife.
Wow. So I want to go back to that, but it also brings me up a question. How much space do you need for, like, if you're going to start this out?
Yeah.
Is a garage like a good size space?
I use half of a 2-car garage, and I can make whatever knife I want in there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And like the heat and stuff like that, there's no problems.
I put the forge outside the garage.
Okay, all right.
When there's heat. Yeah, okay. That's on the driveway. Yeah.
Okay. But that doesn't take up a lot of space out there then, like the heat part of it?
It's a small setup. I mean, a gas forge, you would just have like a propane tank like for your grill, and a small gas forge big enough to fit the blade in.
Oh, that's all the smaller you need. I still was picturing the movies.
No, it's not the movies. It's you can get a gas forge on Amazon for like $100. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, it's very accessible.
Okay. How much would you say, like, to start out and do this the proper way? Again, not like being like, okay, I'm bootstrapping this, and then I'm gonna have to throw all this stuff away and like basically restart. Like, what are the like 5-6 tools? What would you say to begin with are necessary?
I'll give you the minimum, and then like probably the better choice. So the minimum for shaping the profile of the blade, so cutting it out, is a hacksaw. I'd recommend an angle grinder at minimum, or a bandsaw that can handle metal. One of the two. Okay. Angle grinders work fine.
And you're probably talking, I mean, the difference between a hacksaw and an angle grinder at like a Home Depot or a Harbor Freight, I mean, you're talking like a difference of like $40 or $50.
Yeah, exactly. You probably already have a hacksaw at home if you do any kind of, stuff around the house.
Yeah.
And you might have an angle grinder too. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
And they're cheap, which is nice.
Yeah.
So I still use an angle grinder all the time. And I also have the bandsaw for cutting metal. So it's really dealer's choice on how detailed you want the cut to be.
Okay.
So the minimum for that is the hacksaw. I would say that, but I wouldn't recommend it. The minimum for shaping the blade is a file. Obviously, you can just file away the metal. But I would recommend you could use the angle grinder for this. Precision is not guaranteed.
Yeah, that's it.
But people have done it. I mean, you can look it up online. People have been successful making knives with just angle grinders.
I think starting out, that would kind of terrify me because you'd probably have to have your hands also very close.
Oh, you want protective gear.
Yeah.
You're going to want gloves, eye protection, and most importantly, you're going to want a respirator of some kind, because if there's metal flying everywhere, you can breathe that in.
Yeah.
And that's not good. So yeah, safety equipment up front.
Okay, yeah.
It's a given.
This is the PSA.
Yes, exactly. But then I would say, like, in terms of going beyond the file and the angle grinder, the one thing you'll want is some sort of belt sander. You can get away with ones that are made for wood. I would recommend even a small one made for metal. The 1x30 from Harbor Freight's like, I think maybe $100, maybe less.
Okay.
Could be half of that, I don't recall.
Oh, nice.
So you can get away with not investing a ton up front there.
Yeah.
And then if you ever get hooked on knife making, you can spend as much as you want on belt grinders. Okay. So that's the most
expensive. It goes up to
thing.
infinity.
Exactly. Cool. Beyond that, you'll need handle material and steel, obviously. For pins, you can just order pin stock on Amazon, knife supply stores, whatever. It's just brass round rod. That's my recommendation there.
And I have a question on that. I want to get back to the pins. Okay. I'm very intrigued.
Hit me now. Let's go.
Well, so I look at it, and in my mind, I think of it being like squeezed in. That's what I have pictured, is that like it's in a vise, and it's just like cranked until it's like crunched in there.
I mean, sort of.
Am I right? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, you basically drill through the blade the tang of the blade typically, and the scales, they're called, the handles.
Okay.
At a size that's a little tiny bit typically too small for the pin is ideal, so you get a snug fit.
Okay.
And then you can hammer it in or squeeze it in with a vise.
Oh.
So you're actually pretty correct.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
You pictured it like it actually is, not the
Okay,
movies. Yeah.
great. Okay, man, I'm 1 for 10.
Yes, killing it. Back to the materials. Anyway, the materials for making the knife, which I almost forgot. Beyond that, you'll want an adhesive. So modern epoxy is great.
Okay.
It guarantees stability outside of the pins, so you don't have to peen them like a rivet, which is how they used to do it. If you get an older knife, and you take it apart, the rivets are peened. There's no adhesive, so the handles will get shaky on your parents' old knives.
That's why. Reason. Okay.
Beyond that, I'm just seeing if I'm forgetting anything. Oh yeah, you need something to get it hot in. You can use literally a fire pit in the backyard. You just need to get the steel up to kind of a salmon color. And if you're going to make a knife and you don't want to invest in a forge, which I wouldn't recommend for your first one, if you get it up hot enough, you can use a magnet held with a vice grip or something, like a hand vice. And once it goes non-magnetic, you can plunge it. Because steel goes non-magnetic when you get it hot enough.
Really?
And that's a good kind of rule of thumb for making a knife. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, charcoal pit is fine. But if you want to invest in a forge, you can, because that gives you a lot of possibilities.
And is there any risk to like the heat level other than you saying you could drop it and break it? And obviously you could burn yourself. That's, PSA number 2.
Yeah, don't want to do that. Yeah.
But I feel like outside of that, is there anything that you have to look out for? Like, could you damage it by, like, if it's hot and you were to touch something or to hit it, like, is it going to shape it in a way that you don't want it to?
In fact, it could. So if you get it up to temperature and you quench it and you do everything right, a lot of the time it can warp the blade. So it goes in straight, comes out with some sort of weird warpage to it.
Okay.
Some of that's recoverable, some of it's not really, and that just depends upon how lucky you are and how precise your control is. The other thing that can happen is you can just have a bad heat treatment, so it stays soft.
Okay.
And that's obviously the worst case scenario, because then you wasted your time.
Yeah.
And I've done this many times.
So it just stays, like, it won't reharden.
Yeah, because what you're doing is kind of reconstituting the molecules a certain way and then forcing them into another arrangement when you plunge it in the oil. That's a very crude version of what's happening at a molecular level.
Yeah.
But at an atomic level, you're rearranging the steel inside. That's what the whole point is. And if you do it wrong, then you end up with it not rearranging at all.
Is there anything that could make that happen, like that would make that more likely? Like if you heated it over a certain, like, coal or a certain type of a gas element or something like that, would that do it because of the elements of that heat?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think so, because as long as it's at the temperature you want it to be at, you don't typically, what you're using doesn't matter too much. I mean, I think even heat is really important.
Okay.
So if you're going to do it in coals, you want it in under the coals, so everything's getting hot.
Okay.
Same thing in a gas forge with a propane burner. You don't want one, like the middle to be really hot and the ends to be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so evenness is important. My hack for that is you just get a piece of pipe, stick that in the forge, and stick the knife in the pipe. Oh. And then it heats the pipe, and the knife's super even inside of that.
Oh, that's a good tip. Oh, very nice.
Yeah, if you're going to do this.
That's it.
Yeah, so that's like all there is to heat treating basically, and then temper afterwards. And then beyond that, you don't really need much else. So you can do it all with hand tools and a fire pit in your backyard, but I would recommend investing a little bit in a few places. Oh, and then the drill, obviously. If you have a drill, great. If you have a drill press, even better. Everybody should have a nice drill. like a cheap drill will serve you poorly if you're drilling through steel, even if it's softened.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it's hard enough to drill through like hard material, like with the proper bits and stuff. But steel would, on a small item, would be very hard.
Yeah, you'll have to have cobalt bits to drill through steel, obviously, because they're made for that purpose, and your other bits will just dull out or break.
Yeah.
Which I've also learned the hard way.
I can see you going through quite a few drill bits trying to drill through steel.
Oh, I still do. Because if you harden your knife and then you forget to drill one of the holes and you try to do it afterwards, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So once we have all the tools and everything in there, are there any things to look out for, like some pits that you fell into when you were first starting of like ruining some blades and stuff like that?
Yeah. So the first part of the process that I've told anybody who asks me is lower your expectations.
Okay.
Heavily when you're thinking about
That
what
seems
kind of
to
knife
be
you're
a
going
theme
make.
on this show.
And how high quality it's going to be. And honestly, the thing that's going to hold up most people isn't 90% of the process. It's getting the geometry of the blade right when it comes to the cutting edge, the bevels.
Okay.
That is the tricky part. That's the scary part. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Because if you get the geometry of the blade wrong, it will cut terribly. And it's hard to be consistent on both sides of the knife.
Is that true for too steep or too narrow of a bevel?
Yeah, depending upon what you're looking to do. Yeah, because if you go too steep, you'll end up you're trying to grind it down, and you'll burn through the cutting edge of the blade.
Oh,
So
it'll
you'll
just
get
dull faster, basically.
Well, you'll actually grind through it.
Oh.
And then it's just an absolute mess. And then
Okay.
it's going to be asymmetrical, and you have to basically, you're just making a smaller and smaller knife.
Gotcha. Okay.
Until you get it to a good edge. If you go too steep, then, you're not making an axe head, you're making a knife. So it won't cut very well. The end could be infinitesimally sharp, and then if it comes out at a right angle, basically, it's not going to cut.
Yeah. See, I would have thought that if you could have sharpened it more, that would have been good.
I mean, it can be, but again, that the resilience of the knife. So if you're going to make a sushi cutting knife, like a sushi chef's knife, it's extremely thin, basically. The cutting edge is probably 15 degrees.
Okay.
The actual bevel. That's not what most people want in their kitchen. The life of that knife, if you use it for anything but cutting soft fish, is going to be extremely short.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Okay.
So like a 20-degree bevel is standard for a Western kitchen knife. So like if you took it to a sharpener, you'd say, I want roughly a 20-degree bevel, and they know what you're talking about.
Okay.
And that's what I shoot for when I make my knives, is to try to bring it down. I do flat grinding, which is just basically a nice flat grind, and then I want to get it down so that it's very, very thin, and then I make sure it's got a 20-degree.
Okay. And is that the same no matter how much the thickness is? Because you mentioned that the thickness could change. So if you have something that's a wider knife, do you want a sharper, a narrower bevel on it?
You kind of want it to flow, if you want to think of it that way. So the micro bevel or the cutting edge, if you're going to have a secondary small bevel on that, you want it to kind of flow into the geometry, the rest of the bevel above it.
So when you've got the knife that you've chosen, and let's maybe stick with a kitchen knife for a 20 degrees.
Yeah.
Would that be kind of standard no matter if you were looking at like a chef's knife or a paring knife or something like that?
Yeah, it's consistent, like really consistent across like general use knives in the kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're not making a specialist knife, you want something that can do a number of things, that's going to be a good sweet spot.
Ah, cool. So outside of that, when you get it and you need to resharpen it, is it a similar process to how you'd actually make that original bevel? Obviously, you mentioned like the whetstone and stuff like that.
It's the same. It's identical. Because that's the thing is, if your knife is dull, you want to reestablish that little bevel, that little cutting edge.
Yeah.
So it's literally abrading the edge down to a point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man.
People don't think about what they're doing when they sharpen a knife, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah, just basically doing what returning it to its original form.
Precisely. And that's why if a knife is heavily used over many, many years, you can look it up online, you'll see a knife that the edge gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're literally taking off metal.
It all just turns into a paring knife eventually.
Basically, yes. Something along those lines.
So once you've got like the kind of basics done, this sounds maybe like the interesting part to maybe you at this point of like creating the artistry of getting to choose your wood or choosing a different embellishment on it or something.
Yeah. But you can go down a rabbit hole there. You can use wood, you can use synthetic materials, you can use stabilized wood, which is really common.
Oh, what's stabilized wood?
You basically take wood and via a process that we don't need to get into, you replace the air in the wood itself with a liquid resin, and then you heat it so that it turns into a resin solid.
Oh.
So it basically makes a kind of waterproof, harder version of the wood.
That's
really
cool.
Shiny when you sand and buff it.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's basically like stained from the inside?
Sort
or like
of,
polyed
yeah.
from the
you
inside?
You use a clear resin for that typically. I guess you could use a colored resin. Yeah, so a lot of woodworking involves, like modern woodworking, because there's all these synthetic materials, involves stabilized wood for wood that otherwise would be a terrible fit for any kind of purpose.
I mean, I guess you are talking about something that for the most part you're going to use in very wet situations.
Kitchen knife, yeah.
Maybe you'll put it like into a dishwasher or stuff like that. So it probably is like.
Oh, you really shouldn't put it in the dishwasher.
Oh yeah.
Should never put a knife in the dishwasher.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's like that's rule number one. If like I give people an info sheet if I make them a knife, and the first thing on there is do not put the knife in the dishwasher.
Okay, good.
Yeah, they don't need that abuse.
Okay, good. All right. So hand wash only. Perfect.
Yeah, knives are easy to clean. That's the thing that's nice about them. If you don't leave them out for a long time, things don't dry on them. They basically just take a quick wipe.
Yeah. Do you do any kind of special embellishments to the blades? Like, is there anything that you found to be very fun or easier or harder to embellish it with?
So I got a laser engraver to experiment with like a year or two ago. And that can be a lot of fun. You can do whatever you want in terms of like putting designs into the blade. I usually just do my maker's mark. Okay. Which is just my initials. But I've had people ask for like custom things engraved on it. But people want like the classic look. They want something clean and simple. So they'll want like something really subtle maybe on the blade as opposed to like a crazy design or something.
Okay. I always kind of think of those like slight ridges that kind of like go up the blade line.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah.
Are you talking about like on the side where it's scalloped?
Yeah. That's sort of what I imagine.
You'll see that in a lot of like Japanese style knives.
That's what I was thinking.
And that geometry is there for a reason.
Oh.
It's not just decorative.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you're cutting something like a vegetable or a tomato or whatever, if there's air could get trapped is the idea. So it can cut more cleanly with those little scallops in it.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, it prevents
I had no
wedging
idea.
when you cut a lot of the time.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of like high-end, super high-end handmade chef's knives will have something called an S-grind, which is something I'm working on learning how to do, where you basically add a wave into the blade so that it gives you the same effect.
Oh, okay. But the whole blade has it.
Basically up the length of the blade, yeah.
Oh, so it would be on both sides or just one?
Just one.
Okay.
Could do it on both, I guess, but I typically have seen it on one.
Okay. I mean, how do you get something like that into it? What's the process of that? Is it when it's hot?
Well, no, you do it. You grind cold, so you grind the shape cold, and you're going to want a belt grinder for this part.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of ways that can simplify how this works. You can either get a contact wheel, which is the belt runs on a wheel, so it's at a radius.
Okay.
Or you can make what's called a platen, which is a flat bit with a rounded bit on it.
Okay.
And the belt runs over that, and you hold the knife up to the belt. And you can get whatever shape you want under that in terms of the radius of the circle.
Oh, okay.
So you can get basically kind of that shape, or you can get kind of a rounded shape into the side of the blade.
Ah, I gotcha. Okay.
And that's a very, very high level technique. It is
don't start with that.
error prone.
Okay.
I'm pretty bad at it, and I've been practicing it for a long time.
Oh, yeah. But it seems like it would be a very neat thing, obviously, once you get it. But
you can take it as far as you want. If you think about it, this craft is thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people have refined a lot of techniques.
I'm sure. Yeah, right? And none of them are doing it over a big fire pit and then hitting it with a hammer.
Oh, there are plenty doing it there. They just aren't pouring it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this was so insightful. I feel like the basic tools are something that you can get relatively easy to be able to start this, which is very neat. I didn't anticipate that. I expected at least a couple of this to be much harder to find.
You probably have most of the tools at home you would need if you wanted to just make a knife.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a good knife or a big knife, but you could certainly make one.
Okay. And then the tools themselves, you mentioned that there's a couple of like online sites to go to.
Absolutely.
So like just searching like custom knife parts.
I mean, you can just put in knife making supplies into any search engine and you'll get them. I'll plug Jantz, Jantz.
Okay.
That's what I use. They're based out of Texas, and they have basically anything you can imagine in terms of materials, exotic materials, standard materials, every kind of knife steel, all the different abrasives.
Okay. Oh, great. And then just trial and error and just keep like kind of trying to do the simplistic and starting with a chef's knife or like a small
like a paring
knife or something would be a good starting point.
Exactly.
Okay, man. Well, thank you so much.
My
This
pleasure.
this honestly was very fun.
I
learned a lot today.
Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. Thank you, Geoff.
Thanks, Cole.
All right.